Well, I thought I would live stream on YouTube, but it is more complex of a process than I realized. So I'm going to have to research that further. In the meantime, here I am recording today's version of This Day in History for September 14th, 2019. Today's coffee mug, a beautiful coffee mug. This was a gift to me, and it has a partner, so there's two of them, and I believe there was a little teapot that came with it too. That's probably way up in a high cabinet where I can't reach it right now, but this was a gift to me from a very nice lady named Ann Seton from Cooperstown, New York, when I lived up there. She was in her 80s a good while ago. If she's still living, she'd be in her 90s. I need to find out about that. Anyway, beautiful coffee mug with irises on it. What a sweet lady. Anyway, before I go into the history, I want to say happy birthday to Michelle. You know who you are. We're not going to plug her into her year here because the whole wide world doesn't need to know exactly how old Michelle is. Although, let me just say she's between the ages of my children. Okay, so happy birthday, Michelle. Hope you have a wonderful day. On this day in 1741, George Frederick Handel finished his Messiah oratorio after working on it nonstop for 23 days. And really, when you listen to it, it's such an amazing work. I'm impressed that it only took 23 days. But thank you for that piece of music. In 1812, the Great Fire of Moscow begins as Napoleon approaches the city and retreating Russians burn it. The fire continued to burn for 5 days. 1 week after winning a bloody victory over the Russian army at the Battle of Borodino, Napoleon Bonaparte's Grand Army entered the city of Moscow, only to find the population evacuated and the Russian army retreated again. Moscow was the goal of the invasion, but the deserted city held no czarist officials to sue for peace and no great stores of food or supplies to reward the French soldiers for their long march. Then, just after midnight, fires broke out across the city, apparently set by Russian patriots, leaving Napoleon's massive army with no means to survive the coming Russian winter. Napoleon tried to negotiate with Alexander I, but Alexander wasn't having it. He was not having it. It's kind of comical to read about how Napoleon would approach him and what Alexander would say in response. But after waiting a month, so it's September now, and he's waiting a month in the Russian winter coming, waiting a month for a surrender that never came, Napoleon was forced to lead his starving army out of the ruined city back the way they came, back through the Russian winter, badgered and hassled by the Russian army. In December, see, they were going on foot, so it takes a long time to get anywhere. In December, Napoleon abandoned what remained of his army and raced back to Paris, where people were saying he had died and a general had led an unsuccessful coup. He traveled incognito across Europe with a few cohorts and reached the capital of his empire on December 18th. 6 days later, the Grand Army finally escaped Russia, having suffered a loss of more than 400,000 men. They started out with 500,000, so they lost 400,000 men during the disastrous invasion, which prompts a note to self. If you ever decide to invade Moscow, make sure none of it occurs during the winter. On September 14 of 1814, Francis Scott Key penned a poem which was later set to music and in 1931 became America's national anthem, the StarSpangled Banner. The poem, originally titled The Defense of Fort McHenry, was written after Key witnessed the Maryland fort being bombarded by the British during the War of 1812. Key was inspired by the sight of a lone U.S. flag still flying over Fort McHenry at daybreak, as reflected in the now famous words of the Star-Spangled Banner. And the rocket's red glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. And there's another song in my head, but I'm not going to sing it right now. In 1847, General Winfield Scott captures Mexico City. The Mexican-American War began with a dispute over the U.S. government's 1845 annexation of Texas. In January 1846, President James K. Polk, a strong advocate of Western expansion, ordered General Zachary Taylor to occupy the disputed territory between the Nueces and Rio Grande rivers. I may be mispronouncing Nueces. It's spelled Nueces. The disputed territory between those two rivers. Mexican troops attacked Taylor's forces, and on May 13, 1846, Congress approved a declaration of war against Mexico. During the Mexican-American War, U.S. forces under General Winfield Scott entered Mexico City and raised the American flag over the Hall of Montezuma. Eventually, representatives from the United States and Mexico signed the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, formally ending the Mexican War, recognizing Texas as part of the United States, and extending the boundaries of the United States west to the Pacific Ocean. Go Texas. In 1851, James Fenimore Cooper, American author, he wrote Last of the Mohicans. He died of dropsy at 61. I'm not sure what dropsy is. I'm going to have to look that up. In 1901, President William McKinley died after being shot by a deranged anarchist during the Pan American Exposition in Buffalo, New York. In 1927, dancer Isadora Duncan was strangled in Nice, France, when the enormous silk scarf she was wearing got tangled in the rear hubcaps of her open car. Miss Duncan was a free-spirited bohemian whose dances were improvisational and emotional. They were choreographed, she said, to rediscover the beautiful rhythmical motions of the human body. On the day she died, Duncan was a passenger in a brand new convertible sports car that she was learning to drive. As she leaned back in her seat to enjoy the sea breeze, her enormous red scarf, which she had worn since she took up communism, one newspaper reported, somehow blew into the well of the rear wheel on the passenger's side. Gertrude Stein said when she heard of this that affectations can be dangerous. Yeah, Isadora Duncan was famous for wearing those long flowing scarves. Note to self, contain your scarves when you're in a convertible. 1944, Joey Heatherton, American dancer and actress, was born in Rockville Centre, New York. In 1947, Sam Neill, New Zealand actor, was born in Omagh, Northern Ireland. That's spelled O-M-A-G-H. Omagh? I'm not very good with Irish pronunciations. Anyway, he was in Jurassic Park, Dead Calm, and The Piano. In 1959, a Soviet rocket crashed into the moon's surface, becoming the first man-made object sent from Earth to reach the lunar surface, as far as we know. The event gave the Soviets a short-lived advantage in the space race and prompted even greater effort by the United States to develop its own space program. In 1964, author John Steinbeck was presented with the U.S. Medal of Freedom. He had already received numerous other honors and awards for his writing, including the 1962 Nobel Prize and the 1939 Pulitzer Prize for Grapes of Wrath. I heard about him that when he would travel to other countries, that he liked to go into bookstores and ask them if they had any of his books. But he wouldn't tell them he was John Steinbeck. So like he would go in and say, Do you have any books by the American author John Steinbeck? Those bookstore owners wouldn't know who he was. And I believe he was in Japan, and he walked into a bookstore and asked that, and they said, "Oh, yes, we have his book, The Angry Raisins." In 1974, I Shot the Sheriff hits #1 on the music charts. While the song had been written by reggae legend Bob Marley in the previous year, it was Eric Clapton's version that ascended to the top of the charts. In 1975, Elizabeth Ann Seton was canonized by Pope Paul VI at the Vatican in Rome, becoming the first American-born Catholic saint. Whenever I see this story, I remember Saturday Night Live's Father Guido Sarducci talking about it. 3 lousy miracles, and the 2 of them was a card tricks. Look that one up on YouTube. Father Guido Sarducci. But this is a real thing. She was born in New York City in 1774. Elizabeth Bailey was the daughter of an Episcopalian physician. She devoted much of her time to charity work with the poor, and in 1797 founded the Society for the Relief of Poor Widows with Small Children in New York. She married William Seton, and in 1803 she traveled with him to Italy, where she was exposed to the Roman Catholic Church. After she herself was widowed and left with 5 children in 1803, she converted to Catholicism and in 1808 went to Baltimore to establish a Catholic school for girls. In 1809, she founded the United States' first religious order, the Sisters of Charity of St. Joseph. A few months later, Mother Seton and the Sisters of the Order moved to a poor parish where they provided free education to poor children. Mother Seton's order grew rapidly, and she continued to teach until her death in 1821. In 1856, Seton Hall University was named for her, and she was canonized in 1975. On September 14, 1982, Princess Grace of Monaco, the American-born former film star Grace Kelly, whose movie credits include The Country Girl and Rear Window, died at the age of 52 from injuries suffered after her car plunged off a mountain road near Monte Carlo. During the height of her Hollywood career in the 1950s, Kelly became an international icon of beauty and glamour. Kelly gave up her acting career after marrying Prince Rainier III of Monaco in April of 1956 in a lavish ceremony in Monaco. The couple, who had met the year before at the Cannes Film Festival, went on to have 3 children. On September 13, 1982, Princess Grace was driving with her youngest daughter Stephanie when she reportedly suffered a stroke and lost control of her car, which plunged down a mountainside. 17-year-old Stephanie survived, but Princess Grace died the following day. Her death was mourned by millions of fans the world around. In 1983, Amy Winehouse, British singer, was born in London. Hey, Michelle. You have the same birthday as Amy Winehouse. Did you know that? In 1999, millions of people evacuated their homes as Hurricane Floyd moved across the Atlantic Ocean. Floyd approached the Bahamas and looked to be on a collision course with Central Florida. Walt Disney World closed its doors in preparation for the first time in its history, and NASA operations at Cape Canaveral were shut down to get ready for the coming storm. It turned out to be North Carolina that bore the brunt of Floyd, however. Floyd brought rain and flooding with it all the way up the eastern seaboard to Connecticut. The year 1999 was a big one for hurricanes. There were 5 Category 4 or 5 hurricanes during the season. 5. In all, 68 people died from Hurricane Floyd. Out of deference to the destruction it caused, the National Hurricane Center retired the name Floyd in the spring of 2000. Thank you so much for watching. Give it a like if you enjoyed this video. Consider subscribing if you haven't already, and feel free to share this if you found it interesting. I will have put links to this day in history and also the day for this day in birthdays in the description box below. And also a postal address if you want to send me any happygrams or coffee mugs. Thanks again, and I'll see you next time. Okay, I think it's working now. The event gave the Soviets a short-lived advantage. Okay. That's awkward. Okay. Okay, let's do that one again. And I take these notes and I forget sometimes that they're a little awkward. Okay. Let's take that one from the top again. Don't make me squeak that pig again. Mean mama.